7-year-old Emma looked into the bleeding stranger's eyes and declared words that would haunt him for 16 years. "I'll marry you when I grow up," she told Cole Brennan, the towering cowboy who had just saved her family from outlaws. When Emma vanished the next morning, Cole carried her innocent promise like a sacred vow, building his ranch while waiting for a child to become a woman. 16 years later, an elegant stranger stepped off the train in Cedar Ridge. Emma had kept her word, but could a love born in childhood innocence survive in the unforgiving Wyoming territory? Before we dive into this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss more heartwarming stories tomorrow. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. The Wyoming Territory had never seen a storm quite like the one that rolled across the plains in the summer of 1885. Thunder cracked like gunshots through the darkening sky as 8-year-old Emma pressed her face against the rain-streaked window of Murphy's trading post. Her small hands traced the lightning patterns while her parents huddled near the fireplace with other stranded travelers. "Mama, when will we get home?" Emma asked, her voice barely audible over the howling wind that rattled the wooden walls. "Soon, sweetheart," her mother replied, though worry creased her brow. They'd been traveling from their homestead to visit Emma's grandmother when the storm trapped them at this remote outpost, miles from anywhere safe. The door burst open with a crash that made everyone jump. 3 men stumbled in, soaked and wild-eyed, their hands resting on gun handles. The leader, a thin man with cruel eyes, scanned the room like a predator sizing up prey. Well, he drawled, water dripping from his hat brim. "Looks like we found ourselves some company for the evening." Emma felt her father's protective arm pull her close as the outlaws spread out, blocking any hope of escape. The trading post owner, old Murphy, raised his shaking hands in surrender. "Take what you want," Murphy whispered. "Just don't hurt nobody." That's when the second door exploded inward. A mountain of a man filled the doorframe, rain cascading off his broad shoulders. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, with hands that could span Emma's entire head and scars that told stories of a hard life lived on the frontier. His presence seemed to swallow all the air in the room. "Boys," his voice rumbled like distant thunder, "I suggest you find somewhere else to wait out this storm." The lead outlaw laughed nervously. 3 against 1, big man. I like our odds." What happened next lasted only seconds, but felt like hours. The giant moved with shocking speed for someone his size. Chairs flew, fists connected with sickening thuds, and when the dust settled, 2 outlaws lay unconscious on the floor. The third had fled into the storm, but the hero had paid a price. Dark blood seeped through his shirt where a bullet had found its mark. Emma broke free from her father's grip and ran to the wounded stranger. "You're hurt." Her mother quickly followed, pressing clean cloth against his wound. Emma stepped back, but the little girl stood her ground, looking up at the gentle giant who had saved them all. His eyes, she noticed, weren't hard like she'd expected. They were kind, tired, and so very lonely. "What's your name?" she asked boldly. "Cole," he managed, wincing as her mother worked. Emma studied his scarred face with the fearless honesty only children possess. "Well, Cole, I'm going to marry you when I grow up." The room fell silent except for the storm outside. Cole stared down at this tiny, fierce creature who had just declared her intentions with absolute certainty. "You might change your mind about that, little darling," he said softly. Emma shook her head firmly. "No, I won't. I promise." Something shifted in Cole's weathered features. For the first time in years, he almost smiled. "Well then, I guess I'll have to wait for you." By morning, the storm had passed, and Emma's family continued their journey. But as their wagon rolled away, she turned back to wave at the tall figure standing in the doorway. Neither of them knew that this moment would shape the next 16 years of their lives. The years that followed that stormy night became the longest of Cole's life. Every sunrise brought the same routine on his growing ranch, but every sunset carried the memory of bright eyes and a fearless promise. He told himself 100 times that children forget, that little Emma had probably moved on to dollhouses and schoolyard crushes. But deep in his heart, he couldn't shake the feeling that some promises were different. Cole threw himself into building something worthy of waiting for. His ranch grew from a small cabin to a sprawling operation with the finest horses in the territory. Other men his age settled down, started families, lived normal lives. But Cole found excuses. Too busy with the ranch. Too set in his ways. Too dangerous with his past always lurking in the shadows. The truth was simpler and more painful. He was waiting for a little girl to grow up. The townspeople whispered about the hermit rancher who lived alone in his big house. Women tried to catch his attention at church socials and town gatherings, but Cole remained politely distant. He'd built walls around his heart so high that most folks gave up trying to scale them. "You're wasting your best years," his friend Sheriff Davies would tell him during their weekly chess games. "That child probably doesn't even remember your name." But Cole would just move his night and change the subject, because talking about it made the loneliness cut too deep. Meanwhile, 1,500 miles away in Chicago, Emma was growing into everything Cole had somehow known she would become. The fearless 8-year-old had transformed into a woman of remarkable spirit and determination. She taught at a small school for immigrant children, showing the same protective instincts that had made her run to a wounded stranger all those years ago. But Emma carried her own secret. While other young women dreamed of society balls and suitable husbands, she found herself comparing every gentleman caller to a memory of gentle eyes and a scarred face. Her friends called her particular. Her mother worried she'd become a spinster. "You can't spend your life waiting for a fairy tale," her mother would say during their evening talks. Emma would smile and pour more tea, never admitting that fairy tales were exactly what she believed in. Because some promises, she knew, were carved so deep in a person's heart that time couldn't erase them. She kept a small sketch she'd drawn from memory tucked in her jewelry box. It wasn't much, just charcoal lines trying to capture the face of the man who had risked everything to save strangers. But it was her treasure, her reminder that courage and kindness still existed in a world that often seemed short on both. When Emma turned 21, suitors lined up at her door. Chicago's eligible bachelors found her beautiful, intelligent, and charmingly independent. But each one left disappointed. There was always something missing, some spark that never ignited, some comparison to a standard none of them could meet. "What are you looking for, Emma?" her closest friend Sarah asked after yet another suitor had been politely declined. Emma gazed out her window at the bustling city streets, her mind wandering to wide-open spaces and a promise made in innocence but kept in faith. Someone who would fight dragons for people he'd never met before. Then came the autumn of 1901, when consumption claimed both of Emma's parents within weeks of each other. As she sorted through their belongings, she found her father's old maps of the territories and her mother's letters describing their journey west 24 years earlier. One letter made her hands tremble as she read her mother's words. "The most extraordinary thing happened today. A giant of a man saved us all from outlaws, and little Emma declared she would marry him when she grows up. I've never seen such gentleness and such a fierce-looking soul. I almost believe she might be serious about keeping that promise." Emma folded the letter carefully and walked to her jewelry box. The sketch was still there, faded but unmistakable. She was 24 now, a grown woman with her own means and her own choices to make. The inheritance wasn't vast, but it was enough. Enough for a train ticket west. Enough to start a new life. Enough to honor a promise that had shaped every day of the past 16 years. That night, Emma packed a single trunk and wrote a letter of resignation to the school. Chicago had given her education, culture, and opportunities. But Chicago had never given her the one thing her heart had been searching for since she was 8 years old. As the train pulled away from Union Station 3 days later, Emma pressed her hand against the window glass, just as she had as a child during that long-ago storm. But this time, she wasn't running away from something. She was running toward a promise, toward a man who might not even remember her name, toward a love that had been waiting patiently for 16 years to finally come home. The train's whistle echoed across the Wyoming plains as Emma stepped onto the wooden platform of Cedar Ridge Station. The little trading post where she'd met Cole was long gone, replaced by a proper town with a main street, a church, and even a small hotel. But the mountains in the distance looked exactly the same, and the wind still carried that wild, free feeling she remembered from childhood. Emma straightened her traveling dress and picked up her trunk, drawing curious stares from the locals. Well-dressed young women were rare sights in these parts, especially ones traveling alone. She walked into Murphy's General Store, the grandson of the old trading post owner now running the family business. "Excuse me," she said to the clerk, a young man about her own age. "I'm looking for information about someone who might live around here." A very tall man named Cole. The clerk's eyebrows shot up. "Cole Brennan? You mean Big Cole who owns the Broken Arrow Ranch?" Emma's heart skipped. After 16 years, she'd found him. "Yes, that sounds right. Could you tell me how to get to his ranch?" "Well, miss, it's about 5 miles north of town, but I should warn you." The clerk leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Cole Brennan ain't exactly the social type. Keeps to himself mostly. Been living alone out there for more years than I can count. You sure you got business with him?" Emma smiled, remembering a little girl's bold declaration and a gentle giant's promise. "Oh yes, I have business with him. Very important business." The ride to the Broken Arrow Ranch gave Emma time to doubt herself for the first time since leaving Chicago. What if Cole had forgotten? What if he'd married someone else? What if the man she remembered through a child's eyes was nothing like the reality she was about to face? But when she saw the ranch house rising from the prairie, her doubts vanished. It was exactly what she'd imagined Cole would build, strong, solid, and welcoming despite its isolation. Horses grazed in well-maintained pastures, and smoke drifted from the chimney of the main house. She paid the wagon driver and stood in the yard, clutching her small traveling bag. The front door opened, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. Cole had aged, his dark hair now streaked with silver, his face bearing new lines earned by 16 years of Wyoming sun and wind. But he was unmistakably the same man who had saved her family that stormy night. Still tall enough to fill a doorway, still broad-shouldered and powerful, still carrying himself with that gentle strength she remembered. He froze when he saw her, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the years that had passed. "Emma." His voice was rougher now, weathered like his face, but it still held that same gentle quality that had comforted a frightened child. "Hello, Cole." She walked closer, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I told you I'd come back." Cole set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "You were 8 years old. I thought. I hoped, but I never really believed." "I keep my promises," Emma said simply. "All of them." He stepped down from the porch, and she realized he was even taller than she remembered. Her head barely reached his chest now, but she felt no fear, only the same safety she'd felt as a child. "You can't be serious about this," Cole said. His voice pained. "Emma, look at me. Really look at me. I'm 43 years old. You're what, 24? 25? I'm old enough to be your father." "You're not my father," Emma replied firmly. "You're the man I promised to marry, and I don't make promises lightly." Cole turned away, running a hand through his graying hair. "This is impossible. You don't know me, not really. You don't know the things I've done, the life I've lived. You remember a single night 16 years ago." "I remember the night that changed my life," Emma said. "I remember a man who risked everything to save strangers. I remember gentle eyes and a fierce face. I remember someone who promised to wait for me, and I'm here to find out if that promise still stands." Cole's shoulders sagged as if carrying an enormous weight. "Emma, you deserve better than this. Better than me. You could have any man in Chicago, someone young and educated and worthy of you." "I don't want any man in Chicago," Emma said, stepping closer. "I want the man who's been living in my heart for 16 years. I want the man who built all this." She gestured at the ranch, while he waited for a little girl's promise to come true. Cole finally turned back to face her, and Emma saw the war raging in his eyes. Love and longing battled with doubt and self-protection. The years had taught him to guard his heart, but they hadn't taught him how to defend against a promise kept. "Stay the night," he said finally. "Mrs. Henderson in town runs a boarding house. Tomorrow, when you've had time to think, you'll realize this is madness and take the next train back to your real life." Emma smiled, the same fearless smile that had captivated him 16 years ago. I sold my house in Chicago, Cole. This is my real life now. The only question is whether you're brave enough to be part of it. As the sun set over the Wyoming plains, Cole stood on his porch watching Emma's figure disappear down the road toward town. For 16 years, he dreamed of this moment. Now that it was here, he was terrified that he might actually deserve the happiness she offered. Emma didn't take the next train back to Chicago. Instead, she marched into the Cedar Ridge schoolhouse the following Monday morning and introduced herself to the school board as their new teacher. The previous teacher had left to get married, and they desperately needed someone educated enough to handle the growing number of children in town. But what did you say your name was? Stammered board member Mr. Peterson. Emma Walsh, she replied confidently. I taught for 3 years in Chicago, and I have excellent references. Within a week, Emma had transformed the little schoolhouse. She brought energy and innovation that the frontier children had never experienced, teaching them not just reading and arithmetic, but geography of the wider world, literature that sparked their imaginations, and science experiments that made learning feel like magic. But her real project wasn't the children. It was the stubborn rancher who rode into town every Saturday for supplies and pretended not to notice when she waved from the schoolhouse window. Emma began a campaign of gentle persistence that would have impressed a general. She started small, baking extra bread and leaving it on Cole's porch with a note that simply said, "Thank you for the kindness you showed a little girl and her family." When he returned the empty plate, she left it full again the next week. "You can't keep feeding me," Cole told her one Saturday when he cornered her outside the general store. "People will talk. Let them talk," Emma replied, loading her own supplies into her small buggy. "I'm feeding a friend. Unless you're not my friend." The trap was gentle but effective. Cole couldn't claim not to be her friend without being cruel, and cruelty wasn't in his nature. Slowly, Emma worked her way into the edges of his life. She began timing her grocery shopping to coincide with his visits to town. She volunteered to help with the church social, knowing he'd be there to help move tables and chairs. She asked his advice about fixing her buggy wheel, then about which horse to buy, then about a dozen other things she could have figured out herself. Each interaction chipped away at his defenses. Emma discovered that beneath the gruff exterior and walls he'd built, Cole was exactly who she'd believed him to be. He was gentle with her, protective without being possessive, and possessed of a dry humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. "You're different than I expected," she told him one evening as they sat on the schoolhouse steps, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Different how?" Cole asked, genuinely curious. "Funnier. I didn't know you could be funny." Cole smiled, and Emma realized it was the first real smile she'd seen from him since her return. "I wasn't particularly funny 16 years ago. Bleeding tends to dampen a man's sense of humor." "There it is again," Emma laughed. "Who taught you to be witty?" "Long winter evenings with no one but horses for company," Cole said. "A man either learns to entertain himself or goes crazy." These moments of connection were precious because they were rare. Most of the time, Cole maintained careful distance, always proper, always polite, but always holding part of himself back. Emma could feel him fighting against something, and she suspected that something was his own feelings. The breakthrough came on a cold October evening when Emma's buggy broke down on the road between town and the Broken Arrow Ranch. She'd been visiting a sick student's family and was later than usual heading back to her boarding house. The wheel came clean off, leaving her stranded as darkness fell and the temperature dropped. Cole found her an hour later, walking along the road in her thin shawl, shivering but determined to make it to safety on foot. "Emma, what in blazes are you doing out here?" He jumped down from his horse and wrapped his coat around her shoulders before she could protest. "My buggy wheel came off," she said through chattering teeth. "I was walking to town." "You could have frozen to death," Cole said, his voice rough with fear and anger. This is exactly the kind of reckless thing I'd expect from someone who thinks she can just show up and change everything. Instead of being offended, Emma smiled up at him. Even scolding her, he was wrapping her in warmth and preparing to lift her onto his horse. "You were worried about me." "Of course I was worried about you," Cole snapped, then stopped, realizing what he'd admitted. Good, Emma said softly, letting him help her onto his horse. Because I worry about you too. That night, as Cole rode her back to town, Emma felt the first real crack in his armor. His arms around her on the horse were protective and sure, and she could feel some of his careful control slipping away. When they reached Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, he helped her down but didn't immediately let go. Emma, he said, his voice heavy with everything he wasn't saying. I know, she whispered back. I know you're scared. I know you think this is impossible. But I also know that some things are worth being scared for. Cole's hands tightened on her waist for just a moment before he stepped back. Good night, Emma. Good night, Cole. As she watched him ride away into the darkness, Emma knew she was winning. Not because she was conquering him, but because he was finally allowing himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved the love she'd been offering all along. The next morning, she found fresh firewood stacked outside the schoolhouse and a note that simply said, "Stay warm." Emma smiled and added it to the growing collection of small kindnesses that were slowly teaching Cole's heart to hope again. The stranger rode into Cedar Ridge on a cold November morning, and Emma felt the change in the air immediately. Cole had been softening toward her, their friendship deepening into something that felt like the beginning of love. But when this dark-haired man with Cole's same towering height and predatory smile stepped off his horse, everything shifted. Emma was sweeping the schoolhouse steps when she saw Cole's face go white as winter snow. The man approaching him moved with the same powerful grace, but where Cole carried himself with quiet strength. This stranger radiated danger like heat from a forge. "Hello, brother," the man called out, loud enough for half the town to hear. "Been a long time." Emma's broom stilled in her hands. Brother. Cole had never mentioned having any family. The reunion wasn't warm. Cole's entire body went rigid, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "What do you want, Jake?" Jake Brennan smiled, but it was the smile of a wolf circling prey. "Can't a man visit his only brother? Heard you'd gone soft, built yourself a nice little spread. Some folks even say you've got yourself a woman sniffing around." His eyes found Emma across the street, and she felt herself being evaluated like livestock at auction. The look made her skin crawl. "Leave her out of this." Cole's voice was deadly quiet. "Whatever you want, say it and get out." "Now that's not very brotherly," Jake said, still grinning. "Besides, I'm curious about this schoolmarm who's got the famous Cole Brennan all twisted up inside. Word travels fast in these parts, brother. Folks are talking about how you two are getting mighty cozy." That evening, Jake cornered Emma outside Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. Up close, the resemblance to Cole was striking, but where Cole's scars spoke of protection and sacrifice, Jake's told stories of cruelty and violence. "So you're the little girl who thinks she's going to tame my brother," Jake said, blocking her path to the front door. "You have any idea what kind of man you're chasing after?" "I know exactly what kind of man Cole is," Emma replied, lifting her chin despite the fear crawling up her spine. Jake laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, sweetheart, you know the man he's pretending to be now. But you don't know the Cole Brennan who rode with me for 15 years. You don't know about the banks we robbed, the men we killed, the towns we burned." Emma's world tilted, but she kept her voice steady. "That's not who he is now, isn't it?" Jake leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Did he tell you about the family in Kansas? The one that got caught in the crossfire when a job went wrong? 3 children, Emma. About your age when you first met my brother." Each word hit Emma like a physical blow, but she forced herself not to show it. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Ask him about it. Ask him about all of it." Jake straightened up, his mission accomplished. Cole's been running from who he really is for 16 years. But blood doesn't wash off that easy. You'd be smart to take the next train back to whatever safe little life you came from. The next morning, Emma confronted Cole at his ranch. She found him breaking horses in his corral, working with a violence that spoke of inner turmoil. "Is it true?" she asked without preamble. "What Jake told me about your past." Cole's hands stilled on the rope. When he turned to face her, Emma saw something die in his eyes. "What exactly did he tell you?" "That you robbed banks. That you killed people. that there was a family in Kansas. Her voice broke on the last words. Cole's face went gray as ash. Emma, is it true? She demanded, needing to hear it from him. For a long moment, Cole said nothing. Then he nodded once, sharp and final. Most of it. The family in Kansas, that was an accident. A job went wrong, people got caught in the shooting. I've been carrying those faces with me every day since. Emma felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. The man she'd built her dreams around for 16 years was a stranger. I tried to tell you, Cole continued, his voice hollow. I tried to warn you that you didn't know who I really was. Jake's right, Emma. You deserve better than this. Better than me. So you're just giving up? Emma asked, tears she refused to shed burning her eyes. You're going to let your past destroy any chance we might have. There is no chance, Cole said firmly. There never was. I was a fool to let it go this far, to let you build fantasies about a man who doesn't exist. The man who saved my family exists, Emma said fiercely. The man who's been gentle and kind with me exists. The man who built this ranch and helps his neighbors exists. Built on blood money, Cole said. All of it. That afternoon, Cole packed a bag and rode out of town with Jake. Emma watched from the schoolhouse window as the brothers disappeared into the horizon, and for the first time since returning to Wyoming, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Mrs. Henderson found her crying that evening, sitting alone in the boarding house parlor. Men got a way of carrying their shame like armor. The older woman said gently, settling beside Emma with 2 cups of tea. Sometimes they get so used to wearing it, they forget how to take it off. What if Jake's right? Emma whispered. What if I don't really know Cole at all? Honey, Mrs. Henderson said, patting Emma's hand. I've lived in this territory for 30 years. I knew Cole Brennan when he first came here, running from whatever demons were chasing him. And I've watched him build a life that's about more than just surviving. A man's past don't have to be his future, but sometimes he needs someone to believe that before he can believe it himself. Outside, the wind howled across the empty plains, and Emma wondered if love was strong enough to call a good man home from the darkness of his own guilt. December brought the worst blizzard Wyoming had seen in a generation. Snow piled higher than fence posts, and the wind howled like a living thing seeking revenge on anyone foolish enough to venture outside. Emma had been visiting a student's family when the storm hit, and by the time she realized the danger, the roads were impassable. She took shelter at the nearest ranch, which happened to be Cole's Broken Arrow. Emma found the place eerily quiet, the animals huddled in the barn, and no sign of the brothers who had ridden away 3 weeks earlier. She broke into the house through a back window, telling herself it was a matter of survival, not sentiment. The house felt hollow without Cole's presence, but Emma made herself comfortable by necessity. She kept the fires burning, rationed the food stores, and waited for the storm to pass. On the 3rd day, she heard horses approaching through the wind. Cole stumbled through the front door, half frozen and alone. Ice clung to his beard, and his lips were blue with cold. He stopped dead when he saw Emma tending the fire in his living room. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, though his voice lacked its usual strength. "Staying alive," Emma replied, not looking up from the flames. "Same as you, I'd imagine. Where's Jake?" "Gone." Cole moved closer to the fire, his whole body shaking. Decided this territory was too tame for his taste. Emma finally looked at him, seeing the exhaustion and something else in his eyes. Relief, perhaps, or maybe just defeat. "You're half dead," she observed. "Get out of those wet clothes before you freeze completely." For once, Cole didn't argue. He disappeared into his bedroom and returned wearing dry clothes. But the shaking hadn't stopped. Emma heated water on the stove and made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. "You should have stayed in town," Cole said, accepting the steaming cup gratefully. "The storm came up too fast. I was at the Morrison place when it hit." Emma settled into the chair across from him. "Lucky for you, or you might have frozen to death in your own house." They spent the next 2 days trapped together by the continuing storm. At first, they maintained careful distance, speaking only when necessary. But gradually, the enforced intimacy began breaking down the walls Cole had rebuilt. Emma found herself taking care of him in small ways, bringing him food, making sure the fires stayed lit, checking that he was warm enough. Cole, despite his protests, began to relax in her presence. On the second night, Emma woke to Cole thrashing in his sleep, crying out names she didn't recognize. Without thinking, she went to him, sitting on the edge of his bed and placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Cole, wake up. You're dreaming." His eyes flew open, wild and frightened, before focusing on her face in the lamplight. "Emma, just a nightmare," she said softly. "You're safe." But instead of settling back down, Cole sat up abruptly, his breathing ragged. The family in Kansas. Their names were Miller, Thomas and Sarah Miller, and their 3 children. Rebecca was 8, same age you were when we met. Emma's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. "Cole, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he said fiercely. "You need to know who you're trying to save. We were supposed to rob the bank after hours, but someone tipped off the law. There was shooting, and the Millers were walking past when it started. They got caught in the crossfire." Tears streamed down his face now, and Emma had never seen anything more heartbreaking than this strong man being destroyed by his own guilt. "I see their faces every night," Cole continued. "Especially Rebecca. She looked at me right before she died." Emma looked at me like she was asking why. Emma couldn't stand it anymore. She pulled Cole into her arms, and he didn't resist. He buried his face against her shoulder and wept like the broken man he'd been hiding all these years. "It wasn't your fault," she whispered, stroking his hair. "You didn't pull that trigger. I might as well have. If we hadn't been there. If you hadn't been there, maybe other innocent people would have died later. Maybe children who lived because you walked away from that life after Kansas." Emma held him tighter. "You can't undo the past, Cole, but you can honor their memory by being the man you became because of it." They stayed like that until dawn, Cole finally letting someone share the burden he'd carried alone for so many years. When morning came, he pulled back to look at her face. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why are you still here after everything Jake told you? Everything I just told you?" Emma cupped his scarred face in her hands. "Because the man who saved my family 16 years ago is the same man who's been torturing himself over 3 strangers ever since. Because the man who could have chosen revenge chose redemption instead. Because I love you, Cole Brennan, all of you, including the parts that are broken." Something fundamental shifted in Cole's expression. The walls he'd built, the armor he'd worn, the distance he'd maintained, all of it crumbled in that moment. He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and desperate and full of 16 years of waiting. When they broke apart, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he whispered. "God help me. I've loved you since you were 8 years old and fearless enough to promise yourself to a stranger." "Then stop fighting it," Emma said. "Stop punishing us both for sins that aren't ours to carry." Outside, the storm was finally breaking, sunlight beginning to pierce through the clouds. But inside the little ranch house, 2 hearts that had been waiting 16 years were finally coming home to each other. Spring arrived like a promise kept, melting away the harsh winter that had forced 2 stubborn hearts to finally surrender to love. Emma moved between the schoolhouse and the Broken Arrow Ranch with an ease that made the townspeople smile and nod their approval. Cole Brennan, they whispered, had finally found his match. The change in Cole was remarkable. The haunted look that had shadowed his eyes for years began to fade, replaced by something Emma had only glimpsed in rare moments before. He smiled more, laughed at her stories about her students, and even joined her for Sunday church services without looking like he was walking to his own execution. "You know the whole town's planning your wedding," Emma told him one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Cole's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Let them plan. Though I should probably ask you properly first." "You should," Emma agreed, trying to keep the excitement out of her voice. "A girl likes to be asked." Cole was quiet for a long moment, and Emma wondered if she'd pushed too hard. But then he turned to face her, his expression serious and tender. "Emma Walsh," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion Emma could see in his eyes. "I'm not asking because of a promise made by a little girl 16 years ago. I'm asking because of the woman you've become, the woman who saw past my scars and my past to find something worth loving." Emma's breath caught as Cole slipped from his chair to kneel beside hers, pulling a simple gold ring from his pocket. You brought light into a life I thought was condemned to darkness, he continued. You made me believe I could be the man you saw in me instead of the man I was afraid I'd always be. Will you marry me, Emma? Not because you promised you would when you were 8, but because you choose to now that you're 25 and know exactly what you're getting into. Tears blurred Emma's vision as she looked down at this gentle giant kneeling before her, offering his heart with the same courage he'd once shown facing down armed outlaws. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Cole Brennan, I'll marry you. Not because I promised I would, but because I can't imagine living without you. Cole slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the porch while she laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, he kissed her with all the pent-up love and longing of 16 years of waiting. The engagement announcement in church the following Sunday was met with enthusiastic applause. Mrs. Henderson wept openly. Sheriff Davies clapped Cole so hard on the back he nearly knocked him over, and half the congregation offered to help with wedding preparations. But their happiness was interrupted 2 weeks later when a familiar figure rode back into Cedar Ridge. Jake Brennan looked leaner and meaner than before, his eyes holding the desperate gleam of a man with nothing left to lose. Emma was hanging laundry behind the boarding house when he found her. Well, Jake drawled, dismounting his horse with predatory grace. Looks like my baby brother finally worked up the courage to propose. Congratulations, sweetheart. Emma's hand moved instinctively to the small pistol Cole had insisted she carry after their engagement. What do you want, Jake? Same thing I've always wanted. My brother by my side where he belongs. Jake's smile was cold as winter wind. See, I've got one last job planned. Big one. The kind that'll set us up for life. But I need Cole's help to pull it off. He'll never go with you, Emma said firmly. That life is behind him. Jake laughed, the sound making Emma's skin crawl. Oh, I think he will. Especially when I explain what'll happen to his pretty little schoolmarm if he doesn't. Before Emma could draw her weapon, Jake had crossed the distance between them, his hand closing around her wrist like an iron shackle. You see, darling, Cole's got a weakness now. You. And men with weaknesses can be made to do all sorts of things they swore they'd never do again. Emma tried to pull away, but Jake's grip tightened painfully. Let me go. Not until you understand the situation, Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. There's a bank in Cheyenne that's been calling my name. Rich deposits, weak security, perfect for a man with Cole's particular talents. He's going to help me rob it, or you're going to have an unfortunate accident. Cole won't believe you'd hurt me, Emma said, though fear was crawling up her spine. Won't he? Jake released her wrist and stepped back, but the threat lingered in the air between them. Cole knows exactly what I'm capable of, sweetheart. He's seen me do things that would give you nightmares for years. The only question is whether he loves you enough to throw away 16 years of playing at being respectable. That evening, when Cole came to town for dinner, Emma told him everything. She watched his face go through a series of emotions, fear and rage and desperation all warring for control. He's bluffing, Cole said finally, but Emma could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Jake's always been all talk. Is he? Emma asked quietly. Because you looked terrified when I told you what he said. Cole was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the peaceful main street of Cedar Ridge. Jake doesn't bluff, Emma. If he says he'll hurt you, he means it. Then what are we going to do? Cole turned back to her, and Emma saw the same resolve in his eyes that had been there 16 years ago when he'd faced down 3 armed men to protect strangers. We're going to end this, he said, once and for all. But as Emma looked at the man she loved, she realized that sometimes the price of happiness was higher than either of them had imagined. And sometimes, even love wasn't enough to escape the shadows of the past. The meeting was set for dawn at the old line shack on Cole's property. Emma watched from the bedroom window as Cole strapped on the gun belt he hadn't worn in years, his movements heavy with the weight of decisions no good man should have to make. There has to be another way, Emma said, though they'd talked through every possibility during the sleepless night. Cole's reflection met her eyes in the mirror as he checked his weapon. Jake's got 4 men with him now. If I don't show, he'll come after you, and innocent people in town might get hurt. This is the only way to keep you safe. By throwing your life away? Emma's voice broke despite her efforts to stay strong. Cole turned from the mirror and crossed to her, taking her face gently in his hands. Not throwing it away, trading it for something infinitely more precious. Emma knew Cole's plan because she'd forced it out of him. He would agree to help Jake rob the bank in Cheyenne, but he'd already sent word to Sheriff Davies and the territorial marshal. The law would be waiting, and Jake's gang would be captured or killed. Cole would likely die in the crossfire, but Emma would be safe, and that was all that mattered to him. I won't let you do this, Emma said fiercely. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. It's not just for you, Cole replied softly. It's for everyone Jake might hurt if I don't stop him now. For the families he'd destroy, the innocent people who'd get caught in his violence. I can't carry any more deaths on my conscience, Emma. As Cole rode toward the lined shack, Emma was already setting her own plan in motion. She'd spent the night writing letters to Sheriff Davies and the territorial marshal, explaining everything and begging them to arrest Jake before the robbery could take place. Then she'd saddled Cole's fastest horse and taken a route that would get her to the lined shack ahead of him. Emma had never shot a man, but she'd been raised on the frontier and knew how to handle a rifle. If Jake wanted to use her as leverage against Cole, she'd make sure that leverage cut both ways. She reached the shack just as Jake and his men were finishing their breakfast. Through a crack in the wall, she could see 4 rough men cleaning their weapons and checking their gear. Jake stood apart from them, his attention focused on the trail where Cole would appear. Emma positioned herself behind a fallen log with a clear shot at the shack's entrance. Her hands were steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. She'd spent 16 years waiting for love to find its way home. She wasn't about to let it be destroyed by the poison of Cole's past. Cole arrived exactly at dawn, riding slowly with his hands visible and his gun belt loose around his waist. Jake stepped out to meet him, that familiar predator's smile splitting his face. I knew you'd see reason, brother, Jake called out. Family loyalty always wins in the end. Let's just get this over with, Cole replied, his voice flat and resigned. That's the spirit. Jake gestured for his men to come out. Boys, I want you to meet my brother, the famous Cole Brennan. Best shot and fastest draw I've ever seen. With him riding with us, that Cheyenne bank won't know what hit it. Emma's finger tightened on the trigger as Jake's men surrounded Cole. She had one clear shot at Jake, but taking it would start a gunfight that Cole might not survive. That's when she heard the thunder of approaching horses. Sheriff Davies appeared first, leading a posse of 6 men, including the territorial marshal. They'd received Emma's message and ridden through the night to get here. Jake's face went from triumph to fury as he realized he'd been trapped. You set me up, Jake snarled, drawing his gun and pointing it at Cole's chest. Your own brother. You stopped being my brother the day you chose to stay in the darkness while I fought my way toward the light, Cole replied calmly. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Jake's finger was tightening on the trigger when Emma made her choice. She couldn't get a clean shot at Jake without risking Cole, but she could create enough distraction to give the posse their chance. Emma's rifle cracked, and Jake's hat flew off his head. In the confusion that followed, Cole threw himself sideways as Jake's shot went wide. The posse charged forward, and within moments, 3 of Jake's men were down and the 4th had surrendered. But Jake wasn't finished. Wounded and desperate, he lunged toward where he thought Emma was hiding, his gun seeking revenge even in defeat. Cole saw him coming and threw himself between his brother and the woman he loved. Jake's bullet caught Cole high in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him to the ground. Emma's second shot took Jake in the chest, and he fell beside his brother, his eyes already glazing over. Cole! Emma ran from her hiding place, dropping her rifle and falling to her knees beside him. Cole was alive, conscious, and trying to sit up despite the blood soaking his shirt. Emma, what in blazes were you doing here? I told you to stay in town where it was safe. Since when do I do what I'm told? Emma asked through her tears, pressing her hands against his wound to stop the bleeding. Jake's voice was barely a whisper as he looked up at his brother one last time. Always were. Too good for the life. Cole, maybe she's right about you. Those were Jake Brennan's last words. The man who had haunted Cole's nightmares for 16 years died, with something that might have been peace in his eyes. As Sheriff Davies helped Emma load the wounded Cole into a wagon for the ride back to town, Emma realized that sometimes love's greatest victory wasn't winning the battle, but choosing to fight it together. Dr. Matthews had said it would take 6 weeks for Cole's shoulder to heal properly, but Emma knew the deeper wounds would take much longer. Jake's death had freed Cole from the shadow of his past, but it had also forced him to confront the finality of choices that could never be unmade. Emma spent those weeks nursing Cole back to health at the boarding house, since Mrs. Henderson insisted it wouldn't be proper for an unmarried woman to stay alone at his ranch. She read to him when the pain kept him awake, brought him meals he barely touched, and listened when he needed to talk about Jake and the strange grief he felt for a brother who had chosen darkness over redemption. "I keep thinking about when we were boys," Cole told her one evening as she changed his bandages. "Before the war, before everything went wrong, Jake wasn't always the man he became." "People make choices," Emma said gently, her hands steady and sure as she worked. "Jake made his, and you made yours. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Maybe if I tried harder to reach him." "Cole Brennan," Emma said firmly, stopping her work to look him in the eyes. "You are not responsible for your brother's choices any more than you're responsible for what happened to the Miller family in Kansas. Jake chose his path every day for 20 years. The only person you're responsible for saving is yourself." By the time Cole was fully healed, spring had given way to summer, and the whole town was buzzing with wedding preparations. Emma had wanted a simple ceremony, but Mrs. Henderson and the church ladies had other ideas. "A love story like yours deserves a proper celebration," Mrs. Henderson declared, bustling around Emma's small room with fabric samples and flower arrangements. "Besides, this town hasn't had a good wedding in 3 years. You'd be selfish to deny us the pleasure." Emma laughed, giving in to the inevitable. Truth was, after 16 years of waiting and all they'd been through to get here, she was ready to celebrate their love with anyone willing to join them. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in August. Cole spent the week before pacing around his ranch like a caged bear, driving his hired hands crazy with nervous energy. You'd think he was facing a firing squad instead of marrying the woman he's loved for 16 years, Sheriff Davies observed, finding Cole cleaning his rifle for the 5th time that morning. "What if she changes her mind?" Cole asked, not looking up from his work. "What if she realizes she's been chasing a childhood fantasy and not a real man?" Davies laughed and took the rifle away from him. "Son, that woman faced down 4 armed outlaws to save your hide. She's not going anywhere." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with just enough breeze to keep the August heat bearable. Emma stood before the mirror in her room, hardly recognizing herself in the white dress Mrs. Henderson had insisted on ordering from Denver. "You look beautiful," Sarah Morrison said, fastening the pearl necklace that had been Emma's mother's. "Like a fairy tale princess." Emma smiled, thinking of the 8-year-old girl who had boldly declared her intentions to a wounded stranger. "I feel like I'm finally becoming who I was always meant to be." The ceremony was held in the little church where Emma had taught Sunday school, with wildflowers decorating every pew and half the county in attendance. Cole stood at the altar in his best suit, his hair tamed for once and his face clean-shaven, looking nervous and handsome and completely overwhelmed. When Emma appeared in the doorway on Sheriff Davies's arm, Cole's expression transformed. The nervousness melted away, replaced by wonder and such obvious love that half the congregation started crying before Emma had taken her first step down the aisle. Pastor Williams kept the service simple and heartfelt. When it came time for vows, Cole's voice was steady and strong as he promised to love and cherish Emma for all the days of his life. 16 years ago, Emma said when it was her turn, a little girl made a promise to a hero who saved her family. Today, a woman chooses to marry the man who saved her heart. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed Emma with such tender reverence that there wasn't a dry eye in the church. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause as the couple walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, finally united after 16 years of waiting. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. There was dancing in the church hall, more food than the town could eat in a week, and toast after toast to the couple who had proven that true love was worth waiting for. As the evening wound down, Cole and Emma slipped away from the festivities to walk alone under the star-filled Wyoming sky. They found themselves at the spot where the old trading post had once stood, where an 8-year-old girl had first met her future husband. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked, pulling Emma close as they looked up at the vast expanse of stars. "Giving up your life in Chicago for all this?" Emma turned in his arms, her face radiant in the moonlight. "Chicago was never my life, Cole. It was just where I was waiting until I was old enough to come home. And now I'm exactly where I belong," Emma said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss her husband. "With you, forever, just like I promised." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, witness to a love story that had begun with a child's innocent promise and had grown into something strong enough to weather any storm the future might bring. 10 years had transformed the Broken Arrow Ranch from a lonely bachelor's refuge into the heart of a thriving family. Emma stood on the front porch, her hand resting on her rounded belly where their fourth child was growing, watching as 8-year-old Rebecca chased her younger brothers around the yard while Cole repaired a fence post nearby. Rebecca had her father's height and her mother's fearless spirit. At 8, she was already declaring her intention to be a doctor, a teacher, and a sheriff all at the same time. 5-year-old Thomas was quieter, more thoughtful, content to sit with his father and learn about horses and responsibility. 3-year-old Samuel was pure mischief, keeping Emma constantly on her toes with his adventures. "Mama, tell us the story," Rebecca called out, abandoning her game and running to the porch with her brothers close behind. Emma smiled, settling into the rocking chair Cole had made for her during her first pregnancy. "Which story would you like to hear?" "The one about how you and Papa met," Thomas said, climbing onto the porch to sit at her feet. "The one about the promise." Cole looked up from his work, catching Emma's eye with a smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. He set down his tools and joined his family on the porch, pulling Samuel onto his lap while Rebecca settled beside Emma's chair. "Well," Emma began, her voice taking on the storytelling tone her children loved. "It was a dark and stormy night in the Wyoming Territory, and I was just 8 years old, traveling with my parents to visit my grandmother." "Were you scared?" Samuel asked, as he did every time they told this story. "A little," Emma admitted. "But then the most amazing thing happened. When some bad men tried to hurt us, the biggest, strongest cowboy I'd ever seen came to our rescue." Cole chuckled, his arms tightening around his youngest son. "I wasn't that big." "Papa, you were enormous," Rebecca protested. "Tell them how big you were, Mama." "Your father was like a giant from a fairy tale," Emma continued, her eyes sparkling with love and memories. 7 feet tall, with hands that could gentle a wild horse and a heart big enough to save strangers he'd never met before. "And then what happened?" Thomas prompted, though he knew every word by heart. "Well, after your papa saved us, he was hurt, and while my mama was taking care of his wounds, I looked up at this gentle giant and made a very important decision." "You promised to marry him," all 3 children chorused. "I did," Emma laughed. "I told him I was going to marry him when I grew up. And do you know what he said?" "He said he'd wait for you," Rebecca said solemnly, understanding even at 8 that this was the most romantic thing imaginable. Cole's voice rumbled as he picked up the story. "I told your mama that I'd wait for her, even though she was just a little girl and I was already a grown man. I thought she'd forget all about me." "But you didn't forget, did you, Mama?" Thomas asked. "Not for one single day," Emma said, reaching over to stroke his hair. "I carried that promise in my heart for 16 whole years, and when I finally came back to Wyoming, your papa was still here, still waiting, just like he said he would be. And then you got married and lived happily ever after." Samuel declared with the certainty of a child who had never known anything but love and security. We did, Cole said, his voice warm with contentment. But the real magic wasn't the promise itself. It was that your mama chose to keep it, even when she was all grown up and could have chosen anyone in the whole world. Emma looked around at her family, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The ranch had grown prosperous under Cole's careful management and Emma's business sense. They employed half a dozen hands, had the finest horses in 3 counties, and had built a reputation for fairness and generosity that brought them friends from across the territory. But more than that, they had built something that would last longer than prosperity or reputation. They had built a family rooted in love, trust, and the understanding that some promises were sacred. Will you tell your children this story someday? Emma asked Rebecca, who was now old enough to understand that she would someday be a grown woman herself. Rebecca considered this seriously. Yes, but I'll tell them something else too. What's that, sweetheart? Cole asked. I'll tell them that the best promises aren't the ones you make when you're little. They're the ones you choose to keep when you're old enough to know how hard it might be. Emma and Cole exchanged a look of wonder and pride. Their daughter had understood something that many adults never learned. As the sun set over the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the Brennan family remained on their porch, wrapped in the warmth of a love story that had begun with a child's innocent promise and had grown into a legacy that would endure for generations. Emma felt the baby stir within her, as if responding to the love that surrounded them all. Soon there would be another little voice asking for the story, another child to learn that promises made with an open heart and kept with unwavering faith could truly change the world. The little girl who had boldly declared her intentions to a wounded stranger had become a woman who understood that the greatest adventures begin not with grand gestures, but with the simple courage to believe in love, even when the whole world says it's impossible. And somewhere in the growing dusk, the echo of that long-ago promise still lingered, a testament to the truth that some loves are strong enough to wait 16 years, brave enough to face any storm, and deep enough to last forever. Like the story and subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of love, courage, and the promises that change everything. What's your favorite love story? Share it in the comments below, and let's celebrate the power of love that conquers all. Until next time, remember that the best stories are the ones where love wins, no matter how long it takes.